My daughter Sarah recently got married, and as her father, I was there to support her. I raised her alone after her mother, Mary, passed away. But at her wedding, I felt out of place. Sarah had often labeled me as just a man with a middle school education, and the high-status guests at the event only reinforced the feeling that I didn't belong. The atmosphere was tense, and everything unraveled when Sarah suddenly tore off her wedding dress and shouted, "Dad, let's go home." I agreed, and as we were about to leave, a loud scream echoed from an unexpected direction. The guests froze, shocked by what they saw. I'm John, 63 years old, and Sarah is my one and only daughter. She's always been extraordinary. When she was 6, she brought me a drawing saying excitedly, "Daddy, look at this." It wasn't just any drawing. It was a diagram of a ballpoint pen she had taken apart. Sarah had a habit of disassembling things to understand how they worked, but the detailed diagram was beyond what I expected. In that moment, I knew she was destined for greatness. Sarah's physical weakness prevented her from playing outside like other children, so she spent her time exploring her interests, particularly astronomy and weather. I remember one day, she asked, "Daddy, why do clouds float in the sky?" It seemed like a simple question, but I had never really thought about it before. I explained, "Clouds are made of tiny droplets of water, and because of gravity, temperature, and how light the droplets are, they float instead of falling." I worried it might be too complicated, but she eagerly took my answer and ran with it. She asked her teacher, read everything she could find in the library, and by the time she was 12, she knew more about clouds than most adults. Even her teachers were amazed by her intelligence and curiosity. Unlike Sarah, I don't have any special talents. Her mother, Mary, was beautiful and brilliant, a perfect blend of intelligence and charm. Sarah must have inherited her gifts. Tragically, Mary passed away the day Sarah was born. The pregnancy had been smooth, but shortly after Sarah was delivered, Mary's condition worsened. Her body tensed, and within seconds, her heart stopped. Back then, medical technology wasn't as advanced as it is today, and only a small percentage of mothers survived conditions like hers. Mary gave her life for Sarah to come into this world, never even getting to see the daughter she had sacrificed for. I didn't know how to cope. Of course, I loved Sarah, but the thought that she had come into this world by taking her mother's life haunted me. Sometimes, when I looked at her peaceful face, so much like her mother's, it felt almost like a cruel reminder. The dreams I had for our family, the excitement of awaiting Sarah's arrival, were shattered in an instant. Overcome with grief, I cried until I had no tears left. But then, through my sorrow, a small voice inside me reminded me of my responsibility. "Sarah, it's time for your milk," I said. "Don't worry, I'll protect you, no matter what." Holding her tiny, warm body in my arms, I made a promise to myself. No matter the struggle, I would raise Sarah to be a strong and happy adult. I would always be there for her, giving her everything she needed. And as if she understood, she wrapped her tiny hand around my finger. Oh, what were we talking about again? Her voice snapped me back to the present. Standing in front of me, with a smile as bright as the sun, was Sarah. She had grown into a beautiful, confident young woman. She looks just like her mother. Sarah, now 25, has healthy, sun-kissed skin, long chestnut hair with soft waves, and striking light blue eyes. "Which of these dresses do you think looks better?" she asked, holding up 2 options. "How about the powder blue one on the right? It matches your eyes and looks beautiful." Her eyes sparkled as she smiled softly at my answer. Over the years, noticing how much Sarah resembled her mother brought me quiet comfort. Her hair, her eyes, even her expressions reminded me of the love of my life. And now, my little girl was about to get married. Her fiancé, David, works at the same company as her. When they came to tell me about their engagement, I liked him right away. "I'm still learning," David had said. "And honestly, Sarah doesn't need anyone to take care of her. She's amazing on her own, but I want to be the person who supports her when she's tired, someone she can lean on when she needs a break." Hearing those words surprised me, but they also touched my heart. Most of all, Sarah had chosen him, and that was enough for me. I gave them my blessing, even though it was her choice, not mine. Since then, I've noticed how much happier she looks around him. My serious, hard-working daughter has a lightness in her eyes when she's with him, a bit like how I felt when I was with her mother. Before I knew it, the wedding preparations were in full swing, and my little girl was about to start a new chapter in her life. I muttered to myself, is it really okay that I haven't met his parents yet? Sarah and David had already introduced both sets of parents to each other, but I hadn't had the chance to meet David's parents. I thought we should at least meet before the wedding, but neither Sarah nor David seemed interested in setting it up. I don't think it's necessary for you to meet them before the wedding, Sarah said. I agree, there's no need to trouble you with it, sir, David added. Their words felt off, like they were trying to hide something. Still, I figured they must have their reasons, so I decided not to push it. I chose to respect their wishes and stayed out of it. Today, however, was the wedding rehearsal, and I was told David and his parents would be arriving soon. Oddly enough, I felt nervous. I kept pacing, sipping coffee, and heading to the bathroom every 45 minutes. When I finally heard the door open, I froze as David walked in, followed by 3 people I assumed were his parents. David's mother, Linda, looked me up and down, her gaze moving from my head to my toes like she was sizing me up. I'd heard she was in her 60s, but she looked much younger than that. Trying to ignore the awkward tension, I introduced myself. Nice to meet you. I'm John, Sarah's father. I extended my hand for a handshake, but neither of them took it. Feeling uneasy, I looked at them closely. Both were staring at me with cold, judging eyes. Oh, I thought Sarah's father would be quite handsome since she's such a beauty, Linda said, with a laugh that was more mocking than kind. Standing beside her, David's father had a stern, almost hostile expression. In a deep voice, he muttered, about 5 feet 8 inches, an average face, not overweight but not slim either, just ordinary. The sarcastic tone in his voice was sharp, and something about it felt familiar. My mind raced, trying to figure it out. Then it hit me. I knew this man. The arrogant look, the mocking tone, it all came flooding back. You've got to be kidding me, Robert, I blurted out. That's right, he said, a smirk on his face. Long time no see. I couldn't believe it. The man standing in front of me, my daughter's future father-in-law, was none other than my old nemesis from middle school. Robert and I had been classmates for only 4 years, but those years were enough to leave a mark. Back then, I was always ranked first in our grade, and Robert was consistently second, right behind me. He had always seen me as a rival, even though I never thought of him that way. You're so obnoxious, John, he'd say. You're always at the top of the class. Couldn't you let me have it just once? That's why I can't stand perfectionists like you. He'd say things like that while I quietly read my books. But it wasn't about being a perfectionist. I just couldn't be satisfied unless I gave my best effort. I never imagined I'd run into him again, especially not here, and certainly not as the father of my daughter's fiancé. I always gave everything my best effort, so my test scores were nearly perfect, either 400 or sometimes 395 because of small mistakes. Robert was smart too, but no matter how hard he tried, he could never beat me. After every test, he'd throw snide remarks my way, clearly frustrated. Before graduation, one early summer, my life took an unexpected turn. My parents passed away, and though I won't go into the details, the loss completely shattered me. I lost all motivation. I didn't even show up for my final exams and stayed home, overwhelmed by grief. The summer heat faded into autumn, but I barely noticed. Despite my earlier high grades allowing me to move up a grade, I became a recluse, staying with relatives and cutting myself off from everyone. During this dark period, Robert saw an opportunity to bring me down further. See, you got what was coming to you, he mocked. This is what happens when you hog the spotlight and don't let others have a chance. Now you've fallen, and I'm rising. Unlike you, I'm transferring to a prestigious private high school, and I'm going to become a government official. You'll be stuck watching my success from the sidelines for the rest of your life." Those were his parting words before disappearing from my life. I later heard he moved to a dorm to attend that private school. I avoided reunions and lost touch with my old classmates, completely severing ties with my past. Just when I thought I couldn't recover from the loss of my parents, a ray of hope appeared in my life. My wife, Mary. She was 4 years older than me, and meeting her changed everything. She helped me rethink my life and gave me the strength to move forward. Even though I later faced the pain of losing her too, she left me with the most precious gift, our daughter, Sarah. From that moment on, I dedicated my life to raising Sarah and ensuring she had a bright future. I worked tirelessly, doing everything I could to give her the life she deserved. Now, just as I thought she had found the perfect person to marry, I discovered that her future father-in-law was none other than my old rival, Robert. It felt as if fate was punishing me for running away when life got hard. I took a deep breath and turned to face Robert. "Robert, I never imagined I'd run into you again, especially at this stage of life," I said. Robert smirked, flashing that same arrogant grin I remembered. "Yeah, funny how life works. Who would have thought the daughter of a useless middle school graduate like you would end up marrying my son? Life sure is unpredictable." His words were clearly an insult. I wasn't bothered by his disdain for me, I was used to it. But bringing my daughter into it was something I couldn't tolerate. I had spent my whole life protecting and raising Sarah, and hearing him belittle her struck a nerve I couldn't ignore. In the past, I never fought back against Robert's taunts. I hated confrontation and always avoided it. But this time, it was different. I looked him in the eye and said firmly, "Let me make one thing clear. This marriage is about Sarah and David, not about us. Whatever you think of me doesn't matter. My only focus is their happiness. We're only becoming in-laws, nothing more, nothing less. Don't mix it up." My words seemed to get under his skin. With his usual smugness, Robert sat down on the sofa, crossed his legs, and said, "I have no intention of becoming in-laws with someone like you. I'll admit, Sarah is brilliant enough to marry into our family, but once they're married, she'll cut ties with you and become a stranger. We plan to adopt Sarah as our own daughter the moment she marries into this family." Before I could respond, David intervened. "Dad, hold on. This is the first I'm hearing about this. Mom, did you know about this?" Linda, in a mocking tone, responded, "Oh, who knows? I'm just a woman who married into this family. Whatever your father says goes, right? If he says it'll happen, it will." She turned to David and added, "Has talking to a useless middle school graduate lowered your IQ or something?" Her words weren't just insulting, they were cruel. What bothered me wasn't what she said about me, but the way she spoke to her own son. I could see David's face tighten, his fists trembling slightly. Now I understood why David and Sarah had been so hesitant to arrange this meeting. It must have been a shock for David to realize his father and I had a history. As I reflected on Robert's petty remarks and Linda's heartless attitude, I couldn't help but wonder what kind of parents they were. Just as I was about to respond, Sarah stepped in, trying to diffuse the tension. "Let's not have this kind of atmosphere during the dress fittings and rehearsal, okay? We also have a tasting for the meals today, so please enjoy yourselves," she said calmly but firmly, changing the subject without addressing the conflict. Linda stood up, nodding as if nothing had happened. "That's right. We didn't come here to waste time. We're here to make sure the food we serve to our guests is up to standard." As she turned to leave, I noticed something odd. She dragged her right foot slightly as she walked. "Your right foot?" I started to ask, but Linda cut me off sharply. "Your concern is unnecessary. What could a middle school graduate like you possibly know?" she snapped before walking out with Robert. The door closed and silence filled the room. It was just me, Sarah, and David now. David took a deep breath and then bowed his head deeply. "I'm so sorry for my parents' rude behavior," he said, They've always had this superiority complex, and even I can't control them. If only my brother, Michael, were here. It was then that I learned about David's older brother. He had passed away while abroad. My brother, Michael, was an incredible pharmacist, David explained quietly. He was gifted from a young age, and my parents always held him in the highest regard. After he passed, it's like they've been trying to control me even more, as if I have to fill his shoes. Hearing this, I felt a mixture of sadness and respect for David. Despite the pressure from his parents, he was standing strong for Sarah and trying to make their future work. It gave me hope that maybe together they could rise above all this. David's older brother, Michael, had always been passionate about pharmacology, and everyone believed he was destined to become a top professional in the field. But when he turned 26, he made a sudden announcement. He was going overseas. My parents tried to stop him, David explained. If it had been for a vacation or to train at a world-famous hospital, things might have been different. But the path my brother chose was much harder. He paused, then continued. Have you heard of those medical organizations that work in dangerous areas? Hearing that, my heart sank. I swallowed hard and answered, Yes, I've heard of them. So, your brother? David nodded silently. That's why my parents didn't want him to go. He didn't need to say anything more. I could already imagine the weight of what he must have gone through, as well as what might have happened to his brother. The room fell into a heavy silence, the kind where no one knows what to say next. Sarah, however, broke through the gloom. Hey, why are we getting so down? I've heard David talk about his brother before, and I know the story, but I'm sure he wouldn't want us to be sitting here all sad, right? Her words seemed to lift David's spirits, even if only a little. Yeah, you're right, he said. Let's just focus on the wedding for now. David then turned to me and said, John, I really am sorry for how my parents acted earlier. I placed a hand on his shoulder and said gently, The only thing that matters is that you and Sarah are happy. The rest doesn't mean anything. After that, I decided not to bring up what had happened again. Neither Robert nor Linda said anything either. Maybe it was because the venue staff were nearby, or perhaps they were pretending to behave. Either way, they spent the rest of the time smiling and avoiding any more trouble. I didn't realize it then, but this was just the calm before the storm. As the day went on, I sampled the meal options and eventually headed home. Time flew by, and before I knew it, the wedding day had arrived. I couldn't believe the moment was finally here. My little Sarah, who used to walk behind me saying, Daddy, had grown up so much. Seeing her in her pure white wedding dress was a sight I would never forget. I didn't think it was appropriate to carry around a large portrait of my late wife, so instead, I brought a small photograph from one of our trips together. It was my way of sharing this special day with her, even if only in spirit. The ceremony was breathtaking, emotional, and almost magical. It's a memory I'll cherish forever. Afterward, we moved to the reception hall, but that's when something unexpected occurred. I glanced at the seating chart and muttered to myself in disbelief, What is this? Sure enough, I saw it, labeled as useless middle school graduate. Dad! I heard whispers spreading across the room as guests noticed the insult. The staff hurried to collect the charts, their faces pale as they apologized repeatedly. Sarah and David were backstage, changing into their second outfits, so they hadn't seen any of this yet. But from the staff's frantic reactions and the nature of the insult, I knew exactly who was behind it. Well, how about that? My little surprise for you, came a cold, mocking voice behind me. I turned to see Robert standing there, grinning smugly. Linda, beside him, hid her expression behind a folding fan, but her posture and the slight tremor in her shoulders revealed she was laughing at me. My body shook slightly, but it wasn't from anger for myself. It was for Sarah. This wasn't about me. I had lived long enough to shrug off insults like these, but for the father of the bride to be humiliated in front of so many guests would cause rumors that could hurt Sarah deeply. I'd tried to avoid a scene all day, but this childish stunt had pushed me to my limit. Calmly, I said, "At 63 years old, you still pull stunts like this? How pathetic." Robert's grin widened. "I'm a man who graduated from a prestigious university, climbed the ranks to become a government official, and raised a son who works for a top company. And you? You gave up on school, locked yourself away, didn't even take the high school entrance exams, and stayed nothing more than a middle school graduate. This is a celebration for the elite. You should leave immediately." His voice echoed through the room, loud and venomous. Curious guests began to gather, drawn by the commotion. I was about to respond, worried about how this public embarrassment would affect Sarah, when a calm, firm voice rang out. "Dad, let's go home." It was Sarah. I turned to see her standing there, no longer in her wedding gown, but in her casual clothes, her face emotionless. The staff, who had just finished collecting the seating charts, stood frozen, trembling as they watched her. Sarah had clearly heard everything. David joined her a moment later, also out of his tuxedo and into regular clothes. His voice was steady, but there was an undercurrent of anger that sent chills through me. "John, let's go," Sarah said. Meanwhile, Robert and Linda's faces twisted in fury. "What's the meaning of this?" Robert shouted. "David, Sarah, the reception is about to start. Why are you doing this?" David stepped forward, his 6 feet 4 inches frame towering over his much shorter mother. Linda flinched and took a step back. "Mom," David said, his voice cold and sharp, "aren't you ashamed of what you've done? I understand that you've put all your expectations on me since my brother Michael passed away, but I'm not your puppet. I want to live my own life. I'll repay the kindness you've shown me, but if you keep acting this way, I'm ready to cut ties with both of you." A heavy silence filled the room. Guests who had been watching started whispering, too afraid to intervene. Robert, unable to hold back his anger, shouted, "How dare you? Defying your parents is unforgivable, but you and Sarah can leave. This wedding is completely off." Robert was still the same person who had once screamed at me in school, demanding the top spot. I was too tired even to sigh. Ignoring Robert, I turned to Sarah and said, "You're right, let's go home." With Robert canceling the wedding, it was clear it couldn't continue. Though it would inconvenience the guests, leaving seemed like the best option. Just as we turned to leave, a sudden scream pierced the air. I spun around to see Linda collapsing, her face pale as she crumpled to the floor. Guests panicked, shouting in confusion. I rushed to her side. "Hey, what are you doing to my wife?" Robert tried to push me away, but for the first time I raised my voice. "Do you want her to die right here?" Robert froze, stunned by my words. While he stood there in silence, I immediately called for an ambulance. David, still in shock, stood frozen, unable to react. People crowded around asking what was happening, their voices full of panic. Sarah pushed her way through and hurried to my side. "Dad," she said urgently. She mentioned feeling dizzy earlier. Her steps seemed unsteady, and when she helped me with the veil, her hands were trembling. I knew right away it had to be a stroke. I carefully tilted Linda onto her side, raised her head slightly, and spoke to her calmly. She responded faintly, which was a good sign, but until the ambulance arrived, I had to monitor her closely. If her condition worsened, I would need to perform CPR. Rolling up my sleeves, I focused on keeping her stable. David, snapping out of his daze, rushed over. "What's going to happen to my mom?" "She's still conscious, which is a good sign," I said, my voice steady. "But with a stroke, immediate treatment is critical. Without it, there could be serious after effects or worse. We'll do everything we can until the ambulance gets here." David nodded quickly, trying to stay calm. Robert, still panicking, shouted, "Stay away from her! Don't touch her!" Ignoring the relatives trying to calm him down, he kept calling out Linda's name, his voice filled with fear. It was clear he couldn't process what was happening. As I watched him, I couldn't help but think back to my own past. I reached into my pocket and touched the photo of my late wife. Looking at her smiling face, I prayed silently, "Please, let me save her this time. Give me the strength to do it." Just then, We heard the staff call out from the entrance, "The ambulance is here!" The paramedics rushed in, and we quickly moved to get Linda the help she needed. "Let's go," I said firmly, as the team worked to stabilize her and prepare her for transport. I slipped the photo of my wife back into my pocket and took a deep breath to steady myself. Hours later, David called to let me know that Linda had survived the surgery. Relief washed over me. Even though the wedding had to be canceled, knowing Linda was okay made it all worthwhile. After Linda was taken to the hospital, Sarah and I stayed behind to handle the return of wedding gifts and explain the situation to the guests. By the time we finished, exhaustion hit me and I felt my knees weaken. Sarah quickly supported me. "You did great, Dad," she said with a warm smile. "I'm so glad she made it through." "Yeah," I said, letting out a sigh. "But it's not over yet. There's still a lot to do." Sarah nodded slowly, and we started walking down the moonlit street toward the hospital where Linda had been admitted. Visiting hours ended at 9 p.m., so we only had about 45 minutes to see her. We hurried and arrived just as Linda was waking up. She lay there, staring blankly at the ceiling, while Robert sat at her bedside, clutching her hand and sobbing uncontrollably. David saw us at the door and gestured for us to come in. "Thanks for coming, Dad," David said softly. His words seemed to nudge Robert, who shifted uncomfortably, opening and closing his mouth as though trying to speak, but not finding the right words. I sighed and decided to address it head-on. "Look," I said plainly, "I didn't save Linda because you told me to. I don't need any half-hearted thanks." Robert looked down, clearly embarrassed. After a moment of silence, Linda whispered something in a hoarse voice. "Mary." David leaned in gently. "Mom, don't push yourself. Just rest for now. We'll talk again later." His calm, reassuring tone seemed to help, and Linda soon drifted back to sleep. "Dad, just wait here for a bit," David said as he and Sarah left to grab some takeout for dinner. That left me alone with Robert. The silence between us was heavy and awkward, but to my surprise, Robert spoke first. "When Linda collapsed, I was completely useless," he admitted quietly. "You and Sarah stayed so calm. Have you worked in medicine before?" I realized Robert still believed I had only a middle school education. He was probably shocked by how I had handled the situation. It was time to explain. "No," I began. "I'm not just a middle school graduate. I was delayed for a few years, but I passed my GED, went on to college, and eventually became a doctor." Robert blinked, stunned. "A doctor?" he asked, almost disbelieving. I nodded, recalling how Robert once mentioned wanting to be a doctor too. I had assumed he'd pursue that path, given his ambition, but clearly that hadn't happened. "Being a high-ranking bureaucrat is impressive," I said, "but it doesn't seem like you chose it because you loved it." Robert sighed heavily, his usual arrogance replaced by something closer to regret. "In my family, becoming a bureaucrat was a tradition passed down for generations. The pressure was enormous, and my father constantly criticized me for never being able to take the top spot in school," he admitted. "That's why you were so obsessed with being number one?" I asked. Robert nodded slowly. "Yes, but I realized something back then. What's the point of being number one if it only happens because someone else holds back?" He paused and looked away as if struggling with the memory. "When you didn't transfer to a prestigious high school even though your grades could have gotten you in, I understood." I stayed quiet, letting his words sink in. For the first time, Robert wasn't the arrogant rival I remembered, but a man weighed down by expectations he never asked for. I felt a wave of relief as Robert continued. "Thanks to that, I became the top student at my new school, did well in university, and eventually became a bureaucrat, but no matter how far I climbed, I always felt empty inside because he wasn't there." "You mean Michael?" I asked gently. Robert's eyes widened in shock at the mention of his late son's name. He froze, staring at me as if searching for answers. Slowly, I pulled the photo of my wife from my pocket and showed it to him. In the picture were my wife, Mary, and myself. "How do you know Michael?" Robert stammered. "Michael and I worked closely together in a medical aid organization," I said. "My wife, Mary, was a nurse, and Michael had incredible knowledge of medicine. Together, we saved countless lives." My voice faltered as memories of those days filled me with both warmth and pain. I'll never forget that day. You should be proud of Michael's final moments. As a member of the medical team, he carried out his duty with incredible bravery. Mary and I did everything we could to help him, but in the end, Michael insisted that the resources we had be used for the children in need, not himself. Robert's face crumpled, and tears welled in his eyes as I continued. Michael was a truly kind soul. He never spoke much about his family, so I didn't know his story. I think it's time you have this. I reached into my wallet and pulled out a small piece of paper. "This is a note Michael left behind," I said, handing it to Robert. Robert took the note with trembling hands. As he read it, sobs escaped him, and he collapsed to the ground. "Michael, he wasn't really my son," Robert managed to say through his tears. "I married Linda when Michael was 14. He wasn't my biological son, but I loved him like he was my own, and now he's gone." Robert fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face, forming a puddle on the asphalt under the clear night sky. At that moment, Sarah and David returned, rushing over, alarmed by the sight of Robert sobbing uncontrollably. But Robert was too consumed by his grief to explain. A few days later, after Linda regained enough strength to speak, I visited her in the hospital. She was still bedridden, but the swift treatment meant she wouldn't suffer any lasting damage. With proper rehabilitation, she would eventually return to her normal life. As I entered the room, Linda's gaze fell on the photo I was holding. "That photo, it's of Mary, isn't it?" she asked softly. I nodded. "You knew my wife?" Linda closed her eyes for a moment, her expression thoughtful. Then, to my surprise, she replied, "Yes. When I was 20, I studied abroad in Switzerland to train as a nurse. That's when I met Mary. She was only 14 at the time, but we bonded over our shared admiration for Catherine Deneuve." Her voice carried a mix of nostalgia and warmth, recalling an unexpected connection between them. It felt as though, in that moment, a hidden part of the past had been revealed, connecting the threads of our lives in ways we hadn't realized. "I had Michael when I was 22, Linda continued softly, "and I had to give up my dream of becoming a nurse. But Mary, she must have become an amazing nurse, didn't she?" I nodded again. She did. Mary was called the modern-day Nightingale by those in the field. People referred to her as the saint with the lamp. By the time I met her, she was 36, and her nursing skills were extraordinary. We worked together, got married, and alongside Michael, we saved countless lives. I paused, my mind drifting back to the painful memory of Michael collapsing during a mission from a stroke. I lost control. I acted far from what's expected of a doctor, but even then, Mary stayed calm, and Michael, even as his strength faded, thought only of others. He insisted on prioritizing the children who needed resources, not himself. I reached into my pocket, my voice steady. Michael made me promise that if I ever returned to the States and met his parents, I would deliver a message. He said that while his life might end there, he wanted you and Robert to live long lives. He especially wanted you to take care of your health, knowing the family history of strokes. Linda listened quietly, her face reflecting both grief and understanding. "Robert told me what happened to Michael," she said, her voice strained but steady. "After we lost him, both Robert and I became so focused on Adam. We wanted him to have a happy, normal life, but in our pride and stubbornness, we ended up hurting Sarah and you." She paused, tears welling up in her eyes. It wasn't until I saw the look on David's face that I realized how wrong we were. Apologizing won't fix everything, but please let me say it. I'm sorry, and thank you for saving me. She extended her hand for a handshake, her sincerity clear. There was no hesitation in her gesture, and I saw no reason to refuse. I shook her hand firmly. As a doctor, I did what I was supposed to do. You don't need to thank me for that, I said gently. But please, when Sarah visits, apologize to her. That's all I ask. Linda nodded, tears streaming down her face as she looked me in the eye. For several heartfelt moments, the silence spoke more than words could. Later, both families sat together and reconciled. While I knew I might never fully forgive Robert and Linda for their actions, their acknowledgement of their mistakes was enough for me. What mattered most was that Sarah was happy. A few weeks later, Sarah gently rubbed her slightly rounded belly and smiled. "Oh, Dad, the baby just moved," she said softly. David stood beside her, wrapping his arms around both Sarah and their unborn child in a protective embrace. Watching that simple, everyday moment, I realized this was true happiness, the kind I had always wished for my daughter. I had always wished for Mary to be here, too. She would have cared about nothing more than Sarah's happiness. One day, I received an unexpected call from Robert. "I'd like you to come and pay your respects at Michael's grave," he said. Without a second thought, I agreed, and made my way there. The cemetery was peaceful, with sunlight filtering gently through the trees. The well-kept plants swayed in the breeze, creating a calm, almost serene atmosphere. It was easy to momentarily forget we were in a place of loss. When we reached Michael's grave, I noticed a small laminated note placed there. It read, "I'm doing just fine." Just that simple sentence, but it carried so much meaning. I imagined Michael had left it, hoping to reassure his parents back home. Though his life had been tragically cut short before he could fully achieve his mission, the note perfectly captured his bright, cheerful, and carefree spirit. "Welcome home, Michael," Robert said softly. As he spoke, a gentle breeze passed through, carrying his words upward. Somehow, I felt sure they had reached Michael above us. The clear, cloudless sky reflected a sense of peace, a reflection of Michael's kind and untroubled heart.